A poor girl and her little brother pray in church, asking for a father. A billionaire overhears everything. What happens next is unbelievable. The rain poured relentlessly that autumn afternoon. Ethan Miller quickened his pace, heavy drops soaking his designer suit. He hadn't brought an umbrella. The sky had been clear when he left the office. Typical, unpredictable, like everything in his life lately. At 40, Ethan had built a financial consulting empire. Penthouse apartment, imported car, a solid bank account. Everything except companionship. The silence of his apartment sometimes screamed louder than any city noise. The old church emerged like a beacon among the grey buildings. He wasn't religious, far from it, but the roof offered shelter, and that was enough. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, and the sound of the rain faded behind him. The interior was shrouded in gloom, lit only by a few candles and the timid light filtering through the stained glass windows. He took off his soaked coat, ran a hand through his damp hair and took a deep breath. The scent of old wood and beeswax filled his lungs. That's when he heard it, a whisper, almost imperceptible. Ethan narrowed his eyes, focusing towards the altar. Two small silhouettes knelt on the steps, hands clasped. Children, alone. He approached with silent steps, trying not to interrupt what seemed to be a solemn moment. The closer he got, the more details he could make out. A girl with disheveled brown hair, perhaps 5 years old, and a smaller boy, probably 3, with the same hair color. Both wore dirty, worn clothes, no coats despite the biting cold. God, I just wanted to say we're still waiting. The girl's voice was clear, resolute. I know you're busy taking care of everyone, but could you please send us a dad? He doesn't have to be perfect, just someone who has a warm place for us to sleep, and food for Kai. He's really hungry. The boy opened his eyes, looked at his sister and closed them again, squeezing his small hands tightly. Mommy said you always listen, the girl continued. So we'll wait here, thank you in advance. Ethan felt a tightening in his chest, something strange, almost forgotten. Compassion. No, he wasn't like that. Years in the corporate world had hardened his emotions, decisions based on logic, not feelings. That's what made him successful. Are you two okay? The words escaped before he could stop them. The children turned, startled. The boy clutched his sister's hand tightly. The girl positioned herself slightly in front of him, protective. Sorry, Ethan raised his hands in a gesture of peace. I didn't mean to scare you. The girl studied him with suspicious eyes, green eyes deep with a maturity no 5-year-old should possess. It's okay, she finally replied. We're just praying. Where are your parents? Ethan asked, looking around as if expecting an adult to emerge from the shadows. The silence that followed was heavy. The girl lowered her gaze. Mommy went to heaven, she said simply, 3 weeks ago. And your dad? We never met him, she shrugged. It was just us and Mommy. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Who's taking care of you now? No one yet, the girl replied with disconcerting honesty. But we're asking God to send someone. The boy, Kai she had called him, began to cough, a worrying sound coming from deep within his small chest. Are you alone on the streets? Ethan couldn't hide the disbelief in his voice. The girl nodded as if it were just a fact of life. But not for long. Mommy always said God sends angels when we need them most. Ethan felt a surge of anger. Anger at the system that allowed children to be left helpless. Anger at life's injustice. Anger at himself for caring, when for years he had tried not to get involved. What's your name? He asked, crouching down to their level. Julia, she replied. And this is my brother, Kai. He doesn't talk much to strangers. The boy huddled even further behind his sister, large, frightened eyes fixed on Ethan. Have you eaten today? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Julia hesitated. A little. A lady gave us half a sandwich this morning. Half a sandwich for 2 all day. Ethan looked out the window. The rain had worsened, turning into a furious downpour. Thunder echoed outside. It was then that something inside him, something long dormant, stirred. A decision that didn't pass through reason, pros and cons, calculated risks. A decision that came from a place he no longer knew existed. Would you like to come with me? The word sounded strange in his own ears. I have warm food at my place, and it's dry. Julia narrowed her eyes, suspicious. Mommy said never to go with strangers. Your mom was right, Ethan agreed, impressed by the girl's caution. That's very sensible. He took his wallet from his pocket and showed his ID. My name is Ethan Miller. I work in an office nearby. I won't hurt you, I promise. I just want to help until this rain passes. Julia studied the document seriously, as if she could truly understand all the information contained within. Then she looked at her brother, who was trembling slightly. It's raining a lot, she finally said, and Kai is cold. Another thunderclap shook the church windows. Kai flinched, startled, and Julia hugged him. So you can trust me, Ethan said, surprised by his own sincerity. I promise. Julia hesitated for another moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, Mr. Miller, we'll go with you, but only until the rain stops. Ethan smiled, relieved. Deal. He took off his still damp coat and placed it over the children's shoulders, covering both at once. Let's run to my car. It's the black one right there. Kai looked at his sister, who nodded in confirmation. He then extended his thin arms towards Ethan, a silent request to be carried. Ethan hesitated for only a second before picking him up. The boy weighed alarmingly little. He held Julia's hand with his free hand. On three we run, okay? 1, 2, 3. The three dashed out into the rain, Julia clinging to Ethan's hand, Kai secure in his arm. In seconds they were in the car, soaked, but laughing at the small adventure. As he drove home, Ethan watched the two children in the back seat through the rearview mirror. Julia pointed at buildings through the window, explaining something to her brother in a low voice. Kai listened intently, large eyes absorbing everything. Do you live around here? Ethan asked. Julia shook her head. We lived far away by bus, but after Mommy left, we couldn't stay there anymore. Why not? The landlord said we had to leave, she explained simply. He looked sad, but he said those were the rules. Ethan gripped the steering wheel. Evicted, children evicted. And there was no one who could help? Family, your mom's friends? Julia looked out the window. Mommy always said it was just the three of us against the world. Ethan felt the weight of those words. 3 against the world. Now just 2, small and defenseless. They entered the underground parking garage of Ethan's building. The doorman looked curiously at the children, but said nothing more than a polite, "Good evening, Mr. Miller." In the elevator, Julia held her brother's hand tightly. Her eyes scanned the illuminated buttons, the mirror, the polished metal walls. Have you ridden an elevator before? Ethan asked. Julia nodded. At the hospital when Mommy got sick. Ethan didn't ask further. Some stories needed time. When the apartment door opened, the children's eyes widened. The space was wide, minimalist, with large windows showing the city below, now covered by a curtain of rain. Wow, Julia whispered. It's like living in the clouds. Ethan smiled. He had never thought of his apartment that way. To him, it was just a place to sleep between workdays. For you must be hungry, he said, leading them to the kitchen. I'll make something warm. The kitchen, rarely used beyond breakfast, suddenly came alive. Ethan opened cabinets, the refrigerator, assessing what he had available. It wasn't much, he mostly lived on takeout, but he found enough for soup. You can sit there, he pointed to the tall counter stools. Julia helped Kai climb onto one of the stools, then took the other. Both watched Ethan's every move with interest. Do you live alone in this huge place? Julia asked, looking around. Ethan smiled as he chopped carrots. Yes, just me. Aren't you sad? The question caught him off guard. Was he sad? He had never really stopped to think about it. He was too busy building his career, accumulating success. Sometimes, he finally admitted, but I'm used to it. Julia nodded as if she understood perfectly. We get sad sometimes too, even when we're together. Something in the simplicity of that observation deeply touched Ethan. He continued preparing the soup in silence, occasionally looking at the children. Kai had rested his head on the counter, fighting off sleep. Julia kept a protective hand on his back. When the soup was ready, Ethan served 3 bowls. The children waited for him to sit down before they began to eat, with a politeness that contrasted with their worn clothes. Is it good? He asked, watching Kai eat eagerly. Julia nodded, carefully blowing on each spoonful before putting it in her mouth. Very good, thank you, Mr. Miller. After the meal, Ethan realized they needed a bath. Their clothes were not only wet from the rain, but permeated with the dirt of days on the streets. I think you'd like a warm bath. Then we can see what to do with these clothes. Julia looked at her own hands. We're really dirty, aren't we? There was shame in her voice. Ethan felt his heart clench. "Nothing water and soap can't fix," he replied gently. "Come on, I'll show you where the bathroom is." The guest bathroom had a bathtub Ethan had never used. He turned on the faucets, adjusted the temperature, and added a little liquid soap to make bubbles. "Can you wash yourselves, or do you need help?" "I know how to bathe, Kai," Julia replied proudly. "Mommy taught me." Ethan nodded, impressed by her independence. "Great. I'll leave towels here. Call me if you need anything." While the children bathed, Ethan faced a new problem: clothes. Obviously, he had nothing their size. He found 2 of his t-shirts that would serve as improvised nightgowns. As for their clothes, he put them in the washing machine, hoping they would withstand another wash. When he returned to the bathroom, he found Julia helping Kai out of the tub. Both were clean, wet hair plastered to their heads, cheeks rosy from the warmth. "I brought something for you to wear while your clothes dry," he said, handing them the t-shirts. "They're big, but they'll do for now." Julia accepted the clothes with a shy smile. "Thank you." Ethan stepped out to give them privacy and went to prepare the guest room. He changed the sheets, found more blankets in the closet, and turned on the heater. The storm continued outside, occasional lightning illuminating the night sky. When he returned to the living room, he found the children waiting, lost in the enormous t-shirts that reached their ankles. Kai held Julia's hand, eyes heavy with sleep. "Come on, I've prepared a room for you." He led them down the hall to the guest room. Julia stopped at the door, looking at the large bed with wide eyes. "All this for us?" Ethan nodded. "It's just for tonight until the rain stops." Julia led her brother to the bed, and both climbed on with some difficulty due to the height of the mattress. They sat in the middle, looking tiny in that space. "Are you comfortable?" Ethan asked, adjusting the blankets. Julia nodded, helping Kai lie down. The boy was already almost asleep. "Mr. Miller," she called as he was about to leave, "do you think God sent you today to be our dad?" The question caught him off guard. He didn't know how to answer. He hadn't believed in God for many years. "I don't know, Julia. Maybe it was just a coincidence." Julia smiled, a smile too wise for her age. "Mommy said coincidence is just God's way of doing miracles without signing his name." Ethan smiled at the phrase. "Your mom seemed like a very wise woman." "She was," Julia said, lying down next to her brother. "Good night, Mr. Miller, and thank you." "Good night, Julia. Good night, Kai." Ethan closed the door partially, leaving a sliver of light from the hallway. He stood there for a moment, listening to the children's whispers. "We're safe here, Kai." Julia's voice was soft. "Mr. Miller is nice." There was a moment of silence, then her voice again, even softer. "Thank you, God. We're not on the street anymore." Ethan stepped away from the door, a lump in his throat. He went to the living room window, watching the rain that showed no signs of letting up. What was he doing? Taking unknown children into his home? It was crazy, reckless, completely out of his methodical and rational character. Early tomorrow morning, he decided, he would call the authorities, social services, someone who knew what to do with orphaned children. It was the correct procedure, the logical path. He quietly returned to the bedroom door. Julia and Kai slept embraced, as if even in sleep they needed to protect each other. Their expressions were peaceful, perhaps for the first time in weeks. Something stirred within Ethan, a feeling he couldn't name, that he didn't want to name. "It's just for one night," he murmured to himself, as if he needed to convince himself, "just until the rain stops." But as he returned to the living room, he knew he was lying to himself. The rain would eventually stop. What had begun there would not. Ethan woke to a stubborn ray of sunshine piercing through the poorly closed curtain. For a moment, he felt the familiar sensation of Sunday mornings, the silence of the apartment, the promise of a day without commitments, the comfortable solitude that had become his constant companion. Then he heard it, a muffled giggle, a child's voice whispering. And it all came back, the church, the rain, the children. He sat up in bed, rubbing his face. What time could it be? The clock on the nightstand read 7:32. Too early for a Sunday, but his body was already alert, as if it knew something important had changed. He put on a robe over his pajamas and walked silently to the guest room. The door was ajar. He peeked through the crack. Julia and Kai were sitting in the middle of the bed, playing with the pillows. They had made a sort of fort, covering themselves with the sheet like a makeshift tent. Kai laughed as Julia made funny faces, a moment of pure childhood, as if they weren't carrying the weight of the world on their small shoulders. Ethan backed away without a sound, not wanting to interrupt that bubble of normalcy. In the kitchen, he began to prepare breakfast. Eggs, toast, orange juice, things he rarely consumed on weekdays, when strong coffee and a cereal bar were usually enough. The aroma of food must have spread through the apartment, because soon he heard light footsteps approaching. "Good morning, Mr. Miller." Julia appeared at the kitchen door holding Kai's hand. The borrowed t-shirts still served as improvised nightgowns, dragging on the floor. Their hair was disheveled, but their clean, rested faces looked different from the night before. "Good morning," Ethan replied, surprised by his own smile. "Did you sleep well?" Julia nodded. "The bed is very soft. It feels like sleeping on a cloud." "That's good. I'm making breakfast. Do you like scrambled eggs?" "We eat anything," Julia replied pragmatically. Then, as if remembering her manners, she added, "But eggs are very good, thank you." Kai timidly approached the stove, stretching on tiptoes to peek into the pan. "Want to see how it's made?" Ethan asked, surprising himself with the offer. The boy nodded, big eyes fixed on the frying pan. "Come here." Ethan grabbed a chair and positioned it near the stove. "Stand up here to see better, but don't touch, it's hot." Kai climbed up with Julia's help and watched fascinated as Ethan scrambled the eggs. "Do you want to try too, Julia?" The girl shook her head. "I take care of Kai, he likes to cook." There was something in the way she said it, a mature dignity, a sense of responsibility, that made Ethan realize how the roles were already defined between the siblings. Julia, the protector; Kai, the protected. Breakfast went smoothly. The children ate with appetite, but without the desperate voracity of the night before. Ethan observed how Julia cut Kai's toast into small pieces before serving her own, how she checked if the juice wasn't too cold before giving it to her brother. "Your clothes should be dry by now," Ethan commented as he collected the dishes. "I'll go get them for you." In the laundry area, he found the clothes already dry, but as he picked them up, he noticed what he hadn't seen the night before: their deplorable condition. Julia's t-shirt had makeshift patches on the sleeves. Kai's pants had worn knees, with a poorly stitched patch covering a hole. Their socks faded from so much use. Ethan held the pieces in his hands, feeling the thin fabric worn by time and necessity. A lump formed in his throat. These were the only clothes they owned, the only material link to the life they had before. He returned to the kitchen, where the children waited patiently. "I think we need some new things," he said, trying to sound casual. "How about we go shopping today?" Julia looked at him suspiciously. "We don't have money, Mr. Miller." "I know, I'll pay." "But why?" The question caught him off guard. Why was he doing this? What was his plan? Last night he had decided to call social services in the morning, put the children in the system, where qualified people could take care of them. It was the correct procedure, the logical thing to do. Yet here he was offering to go shopping, extending his responsibility for another day. "Because you need it," he replied simply, "and I can help." Julia studied his face for a moment, as if looking for signs of a lie. Then she nodded, serious. "Okay, thank you." Half an hour later, they were in Ethan's car on their way to the nearest mall. The children looked out the window, absorbing the passing city. "Where are we?" Julia asked, observing the tall buildings. "Downtown," Ethan replied. "Have you never been here?" She shook her head. "We lived on the other side, very far." In the mall parking lot, Ethan grabbed a shopping cart and placed Kai in the front seat. The boy smiled, enjoying the novelty. "Where do we start?" Ethan asked, realizing he had no idea what children needed. "I don't know," Julia shrugged. "Mommy bought our stuff, we just went along." Ethan nodded, realizing he was on his own for this mission. "Let's start with clothes then." In the children's store, Ethan felt completely lost. So many sizes, styles, colors. How to know what fit, what was appropriate? A saleswoman approached, smiling at his obvious discomfort. "Can I help you?" "Please," Ethan replied, grateful. "I need everything, actually, for both of them." The woman looked at Julia and Kai, then at Ethan, an unasked question in her eyes. "They're my—" He hesitated. "I'm looking after them for now." The saleswoman nodded, asking no further questions. Let's see what we have then. How about we start with the basics? T-shirts, pants, pajamas, underwear. Julia watched the interaction with keen eyes, always holding Kai's hand, who seemed fascinated by the vibrant colors of the store. The next hour was a whirlwind of fitting rooms, sizes, and decisions. Ethan let Julia choose the colors, only checking if the pieces fit. Kai got T-shirts with dinosaur and car designs, while Julia preferred softer tones, purples and light blues. "Is this enough?" Ethan asked the saleswoman, looking at the pile of clothes already separated. "Well, they need coats too, and new shoes," she replied, discreetly glancing at the children's worn sneakers. Julia held a purple T-shirt against her chest, as if she feared someone would take it. "Can we really take all this?" she asked in a low voice. "Of course," Ethan replied, "and whatever else is needed." When they left the store, Ethan's arms were loaded with bags. Clothes, shoes, socks, even some toys he had insisted on buying when he saw Kai's eyes light up as they passed the section. "Now we need groceries for the house," he said, guiding them to the mall's supermarket. In the supermarket, Ethan realized his bachelor apartment had practically nothing suitable for children. He filled the cart with fruits, vegetables, cereals, cookies, juices, milk, meats, everything he thought might be necessary. "What do you like to eat?" he asked, realizing he still knew so little about them. "Pasta with red sauce," Kai replied, surprising Ethan. It was the first time the boy had spoken directly to him. "Pasta is great," Ethan smiled, putting several packages in the cart. "What else?" "Bananas," Kai continued, pointing to the fruit section. "He loves bananas," Julia explained. "Mommy always bought them when she could." Ethan placed a bunch in the cart. "And you, Julia, what do you like?" The girl thought for a moment. "Hot chocolate on cold nights." Ethan's chest tightened. Such a simple, basic desire. "Hot chocolate it is," he promised, adding chocolate mix and more milk to the cart. Back at the apartment, the three carried the bags inside. Kai insisted on helping, carrying a light bag of bananas, his newly acquired treasure. "Where do we put everything?" Julia asked, looking around. "We'll organize it together," Ethan replied. "The clothes can go in the room where you slept, the food in the kitchen." They worked as a team, unpacking, organizing, finding places for each item. Julia carefully folded the new clothes as if they were fragile treasures. Kai hugged a plush dinosaur Ethan had bought, refusing to let go even while helping. When they finished, Ethan made sandwiches for lunch. Simple but fresh and tasty. They ate in the living room, sitting on the soft rug, because Julia mentioned she liked picnics. It was there, during that impromptu picnic, that the conversation took a deeper turn. "Mr. Miller," Julia began, carefully holding half of her sandwich, "are you going to call the men who take children away?" The question caught Ethan off guard. "What men, Julia?" "The government ones, who take children who don't have parents." Her green eyes were serious, direct. "We met a girl on the street. She said she was taken 3 times. Ethan felt a weight in his stomach. That was exactly what he had planned to do, call social services. But hearing Julia talk like this, "Why do you ask?" Julia shrugged, trying to appear indifferent, but Ethan perceived the fear behind the gesture. "Just to know, so we can prepare." "Prepare?" "Yeah, in case we have to go to different places." Ethan felt as if he had been punched. The idea of separating the siblings had not even crossed his mind. "Does that happen?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Julia nodded. "The girl we met, she had a little brother. They went to different homes." Kai moved closer to his sister, as if he sensed the tension of the conversation. Julia automatically put her arm around him. "We promise not to be any trouble," she continued, her voice small but determined. "I'll take care of Kai, he hardly makes any noise, and we can sleep anywhere. It doesn't have to be the big bed." Ethan felt his throat close. How to explain to a 5-year-old the complexity of the foster care system, the legal issues, his own lack of qualifications to care for children? "Julia," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I'm not going to call anyone today. You can stay here for now." The relief on her face was palpable. "Really? Really? Now could you tell me a little more about yourselves, about your mom?" Julia hesitated, looking at her brother. After a few seconds, she nodded. "What do you want to know, Mr. Miller? What happened to her? How did you end up alone?" Julia took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. She put the unfinished sandwich on the plate and settled onto the rug. "Mommy's name was Helena Smith," she began. the name coming out like a caress. Helena Smith. She worked in a place with lots of papers. She came home late, but she always read us stories before bed. Ethan nodded, encouraging her to continue. One day she left for work and didn't come back. Julia's voice faltered slightly. We waited a lot. Then the phone rang, and it was a man saying there'd been an accident. A car hit hers. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the pain of that memory. Were you home alone when you found out? Julia nodded. The neighbor came. She took care of us that night. But then she said she couldn't anymore, that she had her own kids. She cried when she said that. And then? Then the landlord came. He said that without Mommy paying, we couldn't stay. He gave us 2 days. Julia traced an invisible pattern on the rug with her finger. We packed what we could carry. Photos, clothes, Kai's stuff. And we left. Where did you go? First to a friend of Mommy's house. She let us stay for 3 days. After that, it wasn't possible anymore. Julia shrugged. We understand. Adults have lives, right? They can't keep kids who aren't theirs. The simplicity of that statement broke something inside Ethan. The resigned acceptance of abandonment. After that, we stayed on the street, Julia continued, sleeping wherever we could. Sometimes on park benches, sometimes under bridges. When it rained, we looked for covered places. And food? Some people gave us. There's a bakery that throws yesterday's bread in a special bag, doesn't mix it with the trash. We learned to get it from there. She spoke without shame, just stating facts. And there are water fountains in parks. For water. Kai snuggled closer to his sister, as if the memories also affected him, even being so small. You must have been very scared, Ethan said softly. Julia was silent for a moment. Yeah, we were, but Mommy always said we were never alone, that God watched over us. So I told Kai that every night. And you, Ethan asked, who told you that? Julia looked at him, surprised by the question. After a moment, she replied simply, no one, I'm the oldest. Those words, I'm the oldest, carried the weight of responsibilities no child should bear. Ethan felt a wave of admiration for that little warrior. How long did you stay like that on the streets? I don't know exactly. Many days. We stopped counting. Julia lowered her head. It got hard when it started to get cold. Ethan tried to imagine 2 small children alone in the city, facing hunger, cold, fear, with no one to protect them but themselves, and yet there they were, survivors. How did you get to that church yesterday? We were walking looking for a place to sleep, and it started raining really hard. Then I saw the church and remembered Mommy said, churches are safe places. Julia looked at Ethan. And it was, right? We found you there. Kai, who had been quiet until then, suddenly spoke. God sent him. Julia smiled, running her hand through her brother's hair. Yeah, Kai. We asked for a dad, remember? And then Mr. Miller appeared. Ethan felt his heart race. A father. That's what they had asked for in their prayers. Not just food or shelter, but someone to care for them, to love them. Mommy said God sent hidden gifts, Julia continued, looking at the shopping bags, the new clothes, the warm apartment. I guess she was right. Ethan smiled, trying to disguise the emotion he felt. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt a genuine joy in caring for someone other than himself. It was a strange, unknown feeling, but surprisingly good. You have very strong children, he finally said. Stronger than many adults I know. Julia shook her head. It's not strength, it's just that we didn't have a choice. We had to keep going, you know, for Kai. And it was in that moment, looking at those 2 little survivors, that Ethan knew. He couldn't abandon them to the system. He couldn't risk them being separated, losing the only bond they had left. He didn't know what it would be like. He had no idea what he was doing. But he knew that somehow those children had come into his life for a reason. How about we rest a bit, he suggested, noticing that Kai seemed sleepy. Then we can make hot chocolate. Julia smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. With marshmallows? Ethan realized he hadn't bought marshmallows, a flaw in his shopping expedition. Tomorrow we'll buy marshmallows, he promised, lots of them. Okay, Julia agreed, satisfied. We can wait. And Ethan realized this would be only the first of many promises, the first of many days, the beginning of something he had never planned, but now couldn't imagine otherwise. Some things were missing from their lives, security, certainty, a clear plan, but others remained stronger than ever. Hope, faith, and, surprisingly, a growing sense that perhaps they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Ethan closed his office door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. He had just put Julia and Kai to bed after a busy day at the park. The children's faces, flushed from the sun and laughter, looked healthier with each passing day. It had been a week since that night at the church, a week that had turned his life upside down. He walked to his desk and opened his laptop. The email from social services was still open on the screen, inviting him to a meeting the next day. He himself had requested the contact, but now the idea made him uneasy. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Rachel, the social worker he had spoken with earlier. "Mr. Miller, just wanted to confirm our meeting tomorrow at 10, and remind you it would be good to bring any documentation you have on the children." "Yes, I'll be there," Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. "But I don't have any documentation. It's as I explained, I found them abandoned." "I understand." The voice on the other end sounded professional but kind. "Don't worry, we'll help you navigate this situation. The important thing is the children's well-being." "Yes, of course. May I ask how they are adapting?" Ethan looked at the closed door, thinking of the children sleeping in the next room. "Surprisingly well, they are amazing." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Miller, I need to remind you that in cases like this, the standard procedure would be to place the children with a temporary foster family registered in our system while we search for relatives or a permanent solution." The words dropped like stones into Ethan's stomach. "I know," he replied dryly. "I'm just mentioning it so you're prepared for that possibility tomorrow." After hanging up, Ethan remained still for a few minutes. Temporary family, permanent solution, cold words to describe the fate of two children who had already lost everything. He got up and went to the window. The city glittered below, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding in each apartment. For years he had lived like this, observing life from a distance, without truly participating in it. Focused on his career, on building his company, on accumulating what he thought was success. And then on a rainy night everything changed. A faint creak of the door made him turn. Julia stood at the office entrance, her hair messy from sleep, wearing the new star-patterned pajamas they had bought together. "Can't sleep?" Ethan asked softly. The girl shook her head. "I heard you talking." Ethan's heart pounded. "You heard the conversation?" Julia nodded, her green eyes too serious for a 5-year-old. "Are you going to send us away?" The direct question hit him like a punch. Ethan felt the air escape his lungs. How to explain the complexity of the situation to a child? How to say that legally he had no rights over them? "Come here," he called, sitting on the office sofa and patting the spot beside him. Julia approached with hesitant steps and sat down, maintaining a small distance. Her small hands clutched the hem of her pajamas. "Julia, the situation is complicated," he began, trying to find simple words. "When children are without parents, there are special people whose job it is to ensure they are safe and well cared for. Like you're doing," she said softly. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "Yes, like I'm trying to do, but these people have to follow rules. I can't just keep you without going through certain procedures." "Why not? We're happy here." The simplicity of the question completely disarmed him. Why not, indeed? Why did the system have to be so complicated when the solution seemed so clear? Two children needing a home, a man with space, resources, and surprisingly, the will to care for them. "I'm happy with you here too," he admitted, realizing the truth in those words only as he spoke them. "Happier than I've been in a long time." "Then why do we have to go?" "I didn't say you have to go," Ethan replied, choosing his words carefully. "I said I need to talk to these people about what happens now." Julia looked down at her small hands. "We might be separated from Kai. I heard you talking." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, feeling a wave of protectiveness he had never experienced before. The idea of Julia and Kai being separated, sent to different homes, was unbearable. "That's not going to happen," he said with surprising firmness. "I won't let it." "Promise?" Her eyes lifted, full of hope and fear. Ethan knew he shouldn't make promises he might not be able to keep. He was a businessman, accustomed to calculating risks, never committing to the uncertain. But looking at that small girl, whose world had already crumbled once, He couldn't help himself. "I promise, Julia. You two will stay together." She visibly relaxed, her small shoulders dropping a few inches. "And with you?" The question hung between them, loaded with expectation. Ethan hesitated. "I'll do my best." It wasn't the promise she wanted, and they both knew it, but it was the most honest he could offer at that moment. Julia nodded, accepting what he could give. "You'd be a good dad, Kai already said so." "He did?" Ethan smiled, surprised. "He doesn't talk much to me." "He's shy," Julia explained, "but he likes how you cut the crusts off the bread, and how you make different voices when reading stories." Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest. Small things, insignificant details that somehow meant everything. "I don't know how to be a dad," he confessed. "I never thought I would be." "No one knows at first," Julia shrugged with the peculiar wisdom that sometimes emerged in her words. "Mommy said she learned with us." Ethan smiled at the simplicity of that logic. Perhaps it was true. Perhaps being a father wasn't something you knew how to do, but something you learned along the way. "It's late," he said gently. "You should go back to bed. We have an important day tomorrow." Julia got up, but before leaving, she did something that caught Ethan completely off guard. She took a step forward and hugged him. A quick, shy but real hug. Her small arms barely reached around his torso. "Good night, Mr. Miller," she whispered. "Good night, Julia," he replied, his voice suddenly hoarse. After she left, Ethan remained seated for a long time, looking at the empty doorway. The feeling of that small hug still resonated in his body. He didn't know what would happen at tomorrow's meeting. He didn't know what legal paths he would have to take, what obstacles he would face, but he knew with a certainty that surprised him that he wasn't prepared to let those children go. "I don't know how to take care of them," he murmured to the empty office, "but I know that, as I don't want to let them go." The idea of returning to his old life, to the silence of the apartment, to lonely meals, to empty Sundays, all of it now seemed unbearable. Frightening even. Unbeknownst to himself, he was already involved. More than that, he was transformed. In just 1 week, Julia and Kai had redrawn the contours of his existence, filling spaces he didn't even know were empty. He closed his laptop, leaving the social services email behind. Tomorrow he would face the system with all its rules and procedures, but tonight he allowed himself to simply feel what he already knew to be true. Somehow, inexplicably, those 2 children had become his family, and he would do whatever it took to keep them together. The meeting with social services lasted 2 hours. Ethan left with a folder full of documents, his head brimming with information and a decision formed in his heart. On the way back, he called his assistant. "Mariana, I need you to reorganize my schedule for the next few weeks," he said, watching the traffic from the taxi window. "I'll be working from home indefinitely." There was a pause on the other end of the line. In 10 years of working together, Ethan had never made such a request. "Is there a problem, Mr. Miller?" "No, quite the opposite," he replied, surprised by the softness in his own voice. "I'm making some positive changes." "I see, and in-person meetings?" "Reschedule the ones you can. The essential ones I'll do by video conference, and Mariana, thank you." He hung up before she could ask more questions. Explanations would come later. Now he needed to focus on what mattered, creating a stable environment for Julia and Kai while navigating the complicated process of temporary guardianship. The social worker had been clear. The road would be difficult. With no blood ties, no prior history with the children, Ethan was just a stranger who had found them. But she also recognized the bond that was already forming and agreed to initiate the provisional guardianship process while they investigated the existence of relatives. When he arrived at the apartment, he found the nanny he had hired temporarily playing with the children in the living room. Kai was building a tower of colorful blocks, while Julia drew intently. "Mr. Miller," the nanny greeted him. "Everything went well today. They had lunch, played, and Kai even took a nap after lunch." Ethan thanked her and dismissed her, explaining that he would no longer need her daily services. Her surprised look mirrored his assistant's, but Ethan no longer cared what others thought of his decisions. "Mr. Miller," Julia exclaimed when the nanny left, running to show him her drawing. "Look what I made." It was a colorful house with 3 stick figures in front, 1 tall and 2 small. The sun smiled in the corner of the page, and there were flowers everywhere. "It's beautiful, Julia," he said, crouching down to get a better look. "Is it our home?" She nodded, proud. "And it's us." Kai timidly approached, carrying a blue block. "I want to build with me," he asked, extending the block to Ethan. The simple gesture, the boy's first direct invitation, made something inside him expand. "I'd love to," he replied, sitting on the floor beside Kai. While they played, Ethan told the children about his decision. "I'm going to work from home now," he explained, helping Kai balance a block on top of the tower. "That way I can stay with you." "Forever?" Julia asked, her eyes alert. "For now," he replied cautiously. "I'm working so you can stay here with me, but there are processes we need to follow." "Processes," Julia repeated the word, testing it on her tongue. "Are they boring adult things?" Ethan laughed. "Yes, exactly that." That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan examined his office with new eyes. The space needed to be reorganized to accommodate his new routine. He moved the desk closer to the window, creating an open area where the children could play while he worked. He installed a small low bookshelf for the toys and books they had bought. The next day he woke up early and prepared breakfast before the children woke up. The kitchen, once a place for quick, functional meals, transformed into an experimental lab. He found a pancake recipe online and tried to make them in animal shapes. The result was disastrous. They looked more like amorphous blobs than the bunnies and bears he intended. But when Julia and Kai came to the kitchen, their eyes shone with admiration. "Wow," Julia exclaimed. "You made that for us?" "I tried," Ethan admitted, pointing to the strange shapes. "This was supposed to be a bunny, but I guess it looks more like a... well, I don't know what it looks like." Kai picked up one of the pancakes and held it, examining it seriously. "It's a dinosaur," he declared, with the absolute certainty only a 3-year-old could possess. The three laughed, and something in that moment, the morning light streaming through the window, the sweet smell in the air, the genuine laughter, made Ethan realize his apartment had never felt so much like a home as it did at that instant. The days turned into a new routine. Ethan woke up early, prepared breakfast, and then worked in his adapted office while the children played nearby. Surprisingly, they respected his space when he was in virtual meetings, thanks to a simple system Julia had proposed. A red sign on the door meant, "Quiet, important meeting," while green indicated they could enter. Afternoons were dedicated to activities together. Ethan discovered a new world of playgrounds, libraries with story time, and museums with children's programs, places that had always existed in his city, but that he had never noticed. The apartment, once minimalist and orderly, gained new contours. Colorful drawings adorned the refrigerator, held by fruit-shaped magnets. Toys appeared in the most unexpected places. A plastic dinosaur on the bookshelf, colorful blocks under the sofa, crayons scattered on the coffee table. At first the chaos bothered him. Ethan had always been methodical, organized, but gradually that disorder came to represent life, presence, the opposite of the sterile loneliness he had cultivated for years. One night, while putting away the toys scattered around the living room after the children were asleep, Ethan realized he was smiling. The task, which should have been tedious, brought him a strange satisfaction. Every toy car, every doll, every storybook was a reminder that he was no longer alone. The nights brought another surprising change. Ethan slept better. Before, he would spend hours tossing and turning in bed, his mind racing with work worries, contracts, goals. Now he fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the energy spent with the children, but with a good, satisfied exhaustion. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night and walk silently to the children's room. No longer the guest room, but their room, with freshly painted light blue walls and glowing stars on the ceiling. He would stand at the door, observing their peaceful breaths, marveling at the trust they placed in him. On one of those nights, he saw that Julia was awake, looking at the ceiling. "Can't sleep," he whispered, entering the room. She shook her head. "I had a dream about Mommy." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. "Want to tell me about it?" "She was in a beautiful garden," Julia said softly so as not to wake Kai, "and she was smiling at us. She said we were safe now." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "That sounds like a good dream." "It was," she agreed. "Mr. Miller." "Yes?" "Do you think Mommy would be happy we're with you?" The question caught him off guard. He thought of the responsibility he had taken on, caring for someone else's children he had barely known for a few weeks. "I hope so, Julia," he replied honestly. "I'm trying my best." She smiled in the dark. "I think she'd like you. She always said she liked people who tell the truth." Ethan smiled back, touched by the comment. "Try to sleep now. Tomorrow we have that aquarium visit, remember?" Julia nodded and closed her eyes. Ethan waited until her breathing became regular before quietly leaving. Back in his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the changes of the last few weeks. The silence of his apartment, once oppressive, now had a different quality. It was a living silence, full of promises of the noise that would come in the morning. "Their presence, it makes the silence feel like music," he murmured to himself, surprised by the poetic thought that would never have occurred to the old Ethan. Weeks passed, and small daily miracles began to happen. The first was on a trip to the grocery store. As they crossed the street, Julia reached out and held his hand, naturally, without hesitation. The gesture caught him so off guard that Ethan almost stopped in the middle of the crosswalk. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact without it being a practical necessity. Then came Kai's smile. The boy was still the more reserved of the two, observing the world with large, thoughtful eyes. But one afternoon, when Ethan entered the room to call him for a snack, the boy's face lit up with a spontaneous, pure smile, just from seeing him at the door. And then, one Sunday morning, while they were making pancakes together in the kitchen, Ethan had considerably improved his culinary skills. Julia said something that made him freeze in place. "Did you know Luna from my class has two dads?" "Is that so?" Ethan replied, flipping a pancake. "Uh-huh. She said one is her real dad and the other is her heart dad." Ethan felt his heart race. "And what did you think of that?" Julia shrugged, spilling more flour on the counter than in the bowl. "I thought it was cool, she's lucky." The conversation shifted to another topic, but the word stayed with Ethan. Heart dad. Was that what he was becoming? The idea, which should have scared him, brought a strange sense of comfort. In the office, his colleagues noticed the change. In video conferences, they commented on how he seemed different, more relaxed perhaps, more human. Ethan attributed it to the new routine, to working from home, without mentioning the children. He wasn't ready yet to explain the complex situation to people who knew him only as the focused and sometimes ruthless executive. Mariana, his assistant, was the first to find out when she needed to deliver urgent documents to his home. "I didn't know you had children, Mr. Miller," she commented, surprised to see Julia coloring at the coffee table. "It's a long story," he replied, signing the papers. "I'm temporarily looking after them." But temporarily no longer seemed like the right word. Each day made it clearer that the arrangement was transforming into something permanent, in their hearts, if not yet on paper. The legal process moved slowly. The social worker made regular visits, assessing the conditions, talking with the children, checking their progress. Ethan had hired an adoption lawyer, determined to do everything right. "It will be a long journey," the lawyer had warned, "especially without prior family ties. But we have good arguments. The established bond, your stable financial situation, the fact that the children are thriving under your care." And they were indeed. Julia, once so serious and suspicious, now smiled more easily, played with other children at the park, talked about school friends. Kai, once almost mute, now chattered endlessly about dinosaurs and superheroes, his recent passion. One quiet afternoon, while the children napped after a busy morning at the park, Ethan sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee. From there, he could see the city stretching out in the distance, the same view he once contemplated alone, with a mixture of pride and emptiness. Now the feeling was different. The apartment behind him was no longer just a symbol of success, but a home, a place where laughter echoed, where little feet ran from one room to another, where pancakes were made in strange shapes and stories were read every night. He realized he no longer remembered what his life was like before them. Or rather, he remembered, but that existence now seemed to belong to someone else, someone more solitary, more closed off, someone he no longer had an interest in being. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was the lawyer with updates on the process. "Good news," the voice on the other end said. "We haven't located any immediate relatives. That simplifies our path to permanent adoption. Permanent adoption. The words echoed in his mind long after he hung up. That's what he wanted, he realized. Not just temporary guardianship, not just caring for them for now. He wanted to be a father, their father specifically, to those two children who had transformed his world. When they woke from their nap, Ethan was waiting with cookies and milk in the kitchen. He watched them as they ate, chatting animatedly about their dreams. "I dreamed I had a giant dog and we flew on it," Kai explained, wide gestures accompanying the fantastic story. "That would be cool," Ethan commented, smiling. "Maybe not a giant dog, but a normal dog, who knows?" Their eyes both widened. "Can we have a dog?" Julia asked, incredulous. "Well, not now," Ethan clarified. "But in the future, who knows, if you stay here permanently." Julia put down her cookie, suddenly serious. "You want us to stay permanently?" The question hung in the air, charged with hope and fear. Ethan realized it was time to be completely honest with them and with himself. "Yes," he replied, surprised by the firmness in his voice. "I very much want you to stay. I'm working with people who will help us make this official." Julia and Kai exchanged glances, a silent communication only siblings understand. "We want to stay too," Julia finally replied, speaking for both of them as always. "But can we keep Mommy's name too?" "Of course," Ethan answered, touched. "You can be Julia and Kai Smith-Miller. That way you'll always carry a part of her with you." The rest of the afternoon passed normally. Homework, play, bath, dinner. But something had changed, a silent certainty that hung between them, a future beginning to take shape. That night, after putting the children to bed, Ethan stood in the darkened living room looking at the toys he hadn't put away, at the drawings on the refrigerator, at the small changes that had transformed his space. And he realized a simple yet profound truth. These children are healing something within me. Something he didn't even know was broken. An emptiness he had filled with work, success, possessions. Now that space overflowed with something more valuable. Connection, purpose, love. He still didn't call them his children out loud. He still didn't hear the word dad from their lips. These transitions would come with time, when everyone was ready. But in the quiet moments, when he watched Julia concentrating on her drawings or listened to Kai making up stories for his toy dinosaurs, Ethan already knew. They were his children, in his heart, if not yet on paper. And he, in some unexpected and wonderful way, had become a father. The alarm clock rang at 6 in the morning, but Ethan was already awake. He had planned this Saturday all week. A full day outdoors with the children, no emails, no phone calls, no worries about the adoption process. Just the three of them. He carefully packed the backpack, water bottles, juice boxes, cookies, fruit, sandwiches, sunscreen, band-aids. Julia had an incredible knack for small scrapes, a change of clothes for each, the plush giraffe without which Kai refused to nap. "It's just a day at the park," he murmured to himself, laughing at his own exaggerated concern. But something inside him knew he wanted it to be perfect. While the house still slept, he made pancakes, now his specialty. His technique had considerably improved. He could now make recognizable animal shapes to the children's delight. At 7, he went to wake them. He opened the door slowly and found Julia already sitting in bed, rubbing her eyes. "Good morning," she whispered, pointing to Kai, still asleep. He was sleepy. Ethan smiled. It was typical of Julia, always attentive to her brother, always protective. "Good morning, little one. Remember what we're doing today?" Her face lit up instantly. "The big park with the lake and the little boats." "Exactly. I've already made pancakes. Want to wake your brother while I set the table?" Julia nodded seriously, accepting the mission. Ethan watched her for a moment, her disheveled hair, her star-patterned pajamas, her determined expression as she leaned in to whisper in her brother's ear. That simple image caused a tightening in his chest, a mixture of tenderness and protectiveness that still surprised him. When he returned to the kitchen, he heard giggles and hurried footsteps. Kai ran in, still in his pajamas, hair pointing in all directions. "Boats!" he exclaimed, pronouncing the word with difficulty but with undeniable enthusiasm. "Yes, boats," Ethan confirmed, lifting him to sit in the high chair. "But first breakfast, look what I made." Kai's eyes widened at the duck-shaped pancakes. "Duck!" he shouted, clapping his hands. Breakfast was lively, with the children talking simultaneously about everything they wanted to do at the park. Ethan listened to them, answering questions, making suggestions, savoring not only the food but the moment, something he would never have appreciated months ago. At 9, they were in the car. The day was perfect. Blue sky, pleasant temperature, a light breeze. The kind of day Ethan used to spend in the office, barely noticing the weather outside. "Can we listen to music?" Julia asked from the back seat, already buckled into her car seat. "Of course, what do you want to hear?" "The whale song," Kai answered promptly. Ethan smiled, connecting his phone to the car's sound system. The whale song, actually a children's song about sea animals, had become the unofficial anthem of their car rides. The first time they heard it, Kai tried to imitate the whale sound with such enthusiasm that Ethan almost lost control of the wheel from laughing so hard. During the 30-minute drive to the park on the outskirts of the city, they sang together, pointed at interesting things outside the window, made plans for the day. Ethan, looking in the rearview mirror, caught the smiles and animated expressions in the back seat. The park was vast, with large grassy areas, a lake with swan-shaped paddle boats and a modern playground. When he parked, the children could barely contain their excitement. "Calm down," Ethan laughed, helping them out. "The park isn't going anywhere." With the backpack on his back and a child in each hand, they crossed the parking lot. Julia pointed at everything, explaining things to Kai as if she already knew the place intimately, even though it was both their first visit. "That's where the ducks are, Kai. And over there are swings, look." The first stop was the playground. Ethan sat on a bench watching Julia help Kai on the smaller slides. The girl had infinite patience with her brother, always extending a hand to him, always celebrating his small achievements. "Mr. Miller, look!" Kai shouted from the top of the slide, waving frantically. "I see you, champ. You climbed up by yourself." The boy's proud smile could light up an entire city. After an hour on the playground, they walked to the lake. Ethan rented a paddle boat for the three of them, a huge white swan that made Kai's eyes almost pop out with excitement. "Is it safe?" Julia asked, always the voice of caution. "Perfectly safe," Ethan assured, helping them put on their life jackets. "And look, you're protected. Besides, the lake isn't deep." The paddle boat ride was magical. Julia and Kai leaned over the sides, pointing at the colorful fish that sometimes appeared near the surface. Ethan pedaled slowly, allowing them to absorb every detail. The reflection of the trees in the water, other boats passing by, families waving. Families. The word echoed in Ethan's mind. Was that what they were becoming? At noon, they found a perfect spot for their picnic, a small hill under a leafy tree overlooking the lake. Ethan spread the checkered blanket he had bought especially for the occasion and began to take the food out of the backpack. "Wow," Julia exclaimed, looking at the variety of snacks. "It looks like a restaurant." "An outdoor restaurant," Ethan agreed, distributing the sandwiches. "The best kind." They ate with appetite, talking about everything they had seen so far. Kai, with his mouth full of cookies, tried to describe a particularly colorful fish he had spotted. "It was blue. No, purple. No, blue-purple." Julia gently corrected. "I think it was blue with purple spots, Kai." After the snack, they lay on the blanket looking at the sky through the tree branches. They played at finding shapes in the clouds. "That one looks like a dragon," Julia pointed. "And that one is a truck," Ethan suggested. "And that one is a... Kai frowned, concentrating. "It's a dinosaur eating ice cream." They laughed together, a sound that blended perfectly with the rustling of leaves and the distant shouts of other children in the park. The afternoon brought new adventures. They played ball in an open field, fed ducks by the lake, discovered a small stream where Julia and Kai took off their shoes to dip their feet. Ethan watched them, occasionally taking photos with his phone, but mostly just soaking in the moment. There was something deeply therapeutic about seeing the world through their eyes, the genuine excitement with things adults barely noticed, the ability to find wonders in common stones, in insects, in projected shadows. At one point, Julia convinced him to join an impromptu race to a distant tree. Kai, with his short legs, soon fell behind but kept running, determined. "Come on, Kai," Ethan shouted, slowing his pace to stay beside him. "We can do it." The boy smiled, stretching out his arms to be carried. Ethan lifted him and placed him on his shoulders. "Now we're unbeatable." Together they passed Julia, who protested between laughs. "That's cheating." They ran until they were breathless, falling onto the grass, laughing so hard their stomachs hurt. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that. Uncontrolled, pure laughter that came from somewhere deep and long forgotten within him. As the sun began to set, Kai showed the first signs of fatigue. His eyes began to droop and he yawned more and more frequently. "I think it's time to go," Ethan said gently, helping Julia gather their things. "Just 5 more minutes?" she asked, though she also looked exhausted. "We can come back another day," he promised. "Any time you want." On the way to the car, Kai extended his arms, silently asking to be held. Ethan picked him up, feeling the small body relax against his chest almost immediately. Julia held his free hand, squeezing it tightly, as if to make sure he wouldn't disappear. Before they even reached the parking lot, Kai had already fallen asleep, his head resting on Ethan's shoulder, his breath soft and regular against his neck. In the car, Ethan carefully placed him in the car seat, while Julia, surprisingly awake, looked out the window at the park they were leaving behind. "It was the best day," she declared simply. On the way back, the car was silent. Kai slept deeply, and Julia seemed lost in thought, watching the passing landscape, occasionally pointing at something interesting. Ethan drove slowly, savoring the tranquility of the moment. The day had been perfect, not because everything went as planned, but because they had been together, simply enjoying each other's presence. Looking in the rearview mirror, he saw the two in the back seat, Kai asleep, cheek pressed against the car seat, and Julia, eyes half closed, fighting off sleep. A wave of emotion hit him, so intense that he had to take a deep breath to contain it. "It's been so long since I felt alive," he thought, surprised by the simple truth of those words. He realized he no longer thought about the future, about complications, about the adoption process. He didn't think about labels like father or children. He was simply living the present, caring, protecting, loving. Looking again at the back seat, at those two small lives that fate had placed in his path, Ethan understood. He wasn't thinking about being a father, but he was already living like one. The rain tapped against the windows that Sunday afternoon, creating a gentle rhythm that cradled the apartment. Ethan sat on the living room sofa, laptop open on his lap, finishing up some work emails. On the coffee table, Julia and Kai drew, engrossed in their colorful creations. It was one of those quiet moments Ethan had learned to value. The children's silent presence, the sound of pencils gliding on paper, the feeling of companionship that filled the previously empty space. "Mr. Miller," Julia called, interrupting his thoughts. "Do you want to see my drawing?" Ethan closed his laptop and smiled. "Of course." She proudly held up the paper. It was a yellow house with 3 figures in front, 1 tall and 2 small. The sun smiled in the corner, and there were colorful flowers everywhere. "It's our family," she explained. "Me, Kai, and you." Ethan felt a tightening in his chest. Family. The word still caught him off guard, although it was already part of his daily reality. "It's beautiful, Julia. Only Mommy is missing," she added, lowering the drawing. "But she's in heaven now." Kai, who had been quiet until then, lifted his head from his own drawing. "I want to show Mommy to Ethan," he said, his childish pronunciation still developing. Julia looked at her brother and then at Ethan, hesitant. "We have a picture of her. Can I show you?" "Of course you can," Ethan replied softly. Julia got up and ran to the room that was now officially theirs, decorated with stars on the ceiling and shelves full of books and toys. She returned moments later, holding something carefully in her small hands. "It's the only one we have," she explained, sitting beside Ethan on the sofa. "I keep it in a special place." She held out what looked like a piece of paper folded many times. Carefully she unfolded it, revealing a photograph already worn at the creases, as if it had been opened and closed countless times. "This is Mommy," she said, pointing. Ethan took the photo, and the world seemed to freeze around him. There, smiling at the camera, was Helena Smith. Older than in his memories, with soft lines around her eyes and shorter hair, but unmistakably her. The same Helena he had known in college, with whom he had shared laughter, secrets, and, for a brief period, something that could have become love. Helena, his special friend, holding a baby Kai in her arms, and Julia, perhaps 3 years old, clutching her leg. Ethan's blood ran cold. His hand trembled slightly, and he had to hold the photo more firmly to keep it from falling. "Mr. Miller," Julia's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you okay?" Ethan blinked several times, trying to regain his composure. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. "Yes," he finally managed to say. "It's just that your mom reminds me of someone." Julia studied his face with those green eyes that he now realized were identical to Helena's. "Did you know my mom?" she asked, surprised. Ethan swallowed hard. How to explain, how to process the magnitude of this revelation? "I knew someone similar. A long time ago," he replied, buying time while his mind tried to organize his thoughts. He looked at the photo again. Helena smiled, radiant, with that same smile that lit up entire rooms. The smile that had captivated him the first time he saw her, nervous and lost on campus, looking for the comparative literature class. Helena Smith, the same one who had been his best friend for 2 years, with whom he had spent nights talking about dreams and fears, about books and philosophy. The same one he almost loved, if he had been brave enough to admit his feelings. The same one who, in their last year of college, disappeared without explanation, leaving only a note saying she needed to follow her own path. The same one who apparently had become a mother, Julia and Kai's mother. "She was beautiful," Kai commented, climbing onto the sofa to look at the photo more closely. "Yes," Ethan agreed, his voice hoarse, "very beautiful." Thousands of questions flooded his mind. Why had Helena never contacted him again? What had happened in her life in the years that followed? Who was the children's father? And most importantly, how was it possible that of all the children in the world, her children had crossed his path? "She used to sing us to sleep," Julia recounted, gently tracing her finger over her mother's image. "Beautiful songs, and she told stories about a girl who traveled the world." Ethan felt a pang in his heart. Helena and her stories. He remembered how she would invent fantastic tales at the most unexpected moments, waiting for the bus, studying in the library, walking across campus in the rain. "Mommy said we were never alone," Julia continued, "that someone was always watching over us." "She was right," Ethan managed to say, still holding the photo as if it were a fragile, precious treasure. He looked at the children, Helena's children, and saw her features in each of them. Julia's green eyes, Kai's smile, the silent determination in both. How had he not noticed before? How had he not seen the resemblance? "May I ask you something, Julia?" he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "What was your mom's full name?" "Helena Smith," she replied promptly, but at her work they called her Mrs. Smith. There were no more doubts, it was her. "And your dad?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Julia shrugged. "We didn't know him. Mommy said he left before we were born." Ethan nodded, absorbing the information. He felt simultaneously stunned and strangely calm, as if a fundamental piece of a puzzle had finally fallen into place. "Can I put it away?" Julia asked, reaching out to retrieve the photo. "Of course," Ethan returned the precious item. "Thank you for sharing that with me." Julia folded the photo carefully, in the same way she had unfolded it, with movements that spoke of practice and reverence. It was clearly a ritual. "I look at it every night," she confided, "so I don't forget Mommy's face." Kai snuggled next to his sister. "I'm already forgetting," he admitted sadly. Ethan felt his heart clench. How could he explain to them who he was? That he had known their mother, that they had been friends, that for a brief moment they could have been more than that. "You know," Julia said, breaking the silence, "Mommy would like you." "You think so?" Ethan asked, his voice soft. She nodded with conviction. "She liked kind people, and you're kind to us." Kai agreed, adding, "And you make good pancakes." A laugh escaped Ethan, mixed with contained emotion. "I'm glad you think so." As the children returned to their drawings, Ethan remained still, stunned by the revelation. Helena. All these years, and now their paths crossed again in the most unexpected way possible. He got up and walked to the window, watching the rain that was now falling harder. Coincidence, destiny. What was the word for something as improbable as finding the children of someone who once meant so much? He remembered the night at the church, the children praying, the inexplicable impulse that made him take them home. It hadn't just been kindness or compassion. It had been something deeper, a connection he didn't understand at the time, but which now made perfect sense. He looked again at Julia and Kai, absorbed in their drawings. Helena's children. The children she had loved, raised, protected. The children who were now in his care. An absolute certainty took hold of him, pushing away all the doubts that still lingered. She would trust her children to anyone, he murmured to himself. But if they were with me, I think she would smile. The mental image of Helena smiling in approval brought a wave of peace that Ethan hadn't expected. As if somehow she knew, as if somehow she had guided her children to him. In that moment, as the rain washed the city outside and the children drew peacefully, Ethan made his final decision, no longer as a temporary guardian, no longer as someone trying to do the right thing, but as someone determined to honor a lost friendship, an unlived love, a connection that transcended time and circumstances. Ethan decides to adopt Julia and Kai, not just for them, not just for himself, but also for Helena, the woman he had never forgotten and whose children, by some inexplicable miracle, had found their way to him. The morning after discovering the photo, Ethan woke before his alarm. His mind was already alert, filled with thoughts and decisions. Helena. After all these years, the coincidence was too great to be just chance. He dressed silently and made coffee. Work emails could wait. There was something more important to do. He dialed the social worker's number and took a deep breath. Rachel Harris, the professional voice answered on the third ring. Good morning, Rachel. It's Ethan Miller. Mr. Miller, I wasn't expecting your call so early. Are the children all right? Everything is perfect, he replied, the certainty evident in his voice. In fact, I'm calling to inform you of my decision. I want to begin the adoption process. Permanent adoption, not just temporary guardianship. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Well, that's great news, Rachel finally responded. But I'd like to remind you that it's a significant decision. There's no need to rush, and... I know, Ethan gently interrupted. Believe me, I've thought a lot about this. In fact, I discovered something yesterday that made everything even clearer. I need to talk to you in person. There's a story I need to share. When he hung up, Ethan heard light footsteps approaching the kitchen. Julia appeared at the door, still in her pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Good morning, she murmured. You woke up early. Good morning, little one, he smiled. I have some important things to take care of today. Want to help make pancakes for breakfast? She nodded and came closer to help him. They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Julia, Ethan began, measuring the flour. Remember when we talked about you staying here permanently? Uh-huh, she replied, concentrating on cracking an egg. Today I'm going to talk to the people who can help us make that happen, so I can be as officially responsible for you. Forever. Julia stopped what she was doing and looked at him, her green eyes, Helena's eyes, now fully awake. Like a real dad. Yes, Ethan confirmed, exactly like a dad. She was silent for a moment. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she put the egg aside and hugged him, her small arms barely reaching around his waist. Thank you, she whispered against his apron. In Rachel's office, Ethan told her everything. About meeting Helena in college, about the special friendship they shared, about how she disappeared from his life, and how, by some inexplicable miracle, her children had found their way to him. Rachel listened attentively, making occasional notes. It's an extraordinary story, she commented when he finished. Almost hard to believe. I know, Ethan agreed. But it's true, I have photos from college. I can bring them to confirm. And most importantly, this only strengthens my decision. It's not just about giving a home to 2 children in need. It's also about honoring the memory of someone who was important in my life. Rachel nodded, understanding. I understand your motivation and I admire your commitment, but the process remains the same. Evaluations, home visits, background checks, interviews with people close to you. It's a long road. I'm prepared, Ethan assured. I'll do whatever it takes. As he left the office, he carried a folder full of forms and a list of necessary documents. The path would be long, as Rachel had warned, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt he was moving in the right direction. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan balanced work, childcare, and the demands of the adoption process with an energy that surprised even himself. He filled out forms, collected references, submitted to interviews, opened his life for evaluation. One afternoon, while organizing old documents for the process, he found a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside, among other college memories, was a yellowed photo. He and Helena sitting on the campus grass, laughing at something now forgotten. He had longer hair and a carefree smile. She wore a floral dress and had an open book on her lap. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Helena," he murmured to the photo. "I hope wherever you are, you approve." At home, life continued its course. The children were already completely adapted to the routine, the house to him. There was no longer shyness or hesitation in their gestures. Kai sought him out when he woke from a nightmare. Julia proudly showed him every new drawing or every page she could read by herself. The bond was already formed, long before any official paper. The children looked at him with tenderness. They didn't ask, they just stayed, as if they knew they belonged there, that it was their place. One night, while reading stories to them before bed, Julia asked a question that caught him off guard. "When the process is over, what are we going to call you?" Ethan slowly closed the book. "Whatever you want to call me." "Can we call you Dad?" Kai asked, his small voice almost a whisper. Ethan's heart pounded. "If you feel comfortable with that, yes." "Not now," Julia clarified, always practical. "When it's official, to do it right." Ethan smiled, touched by her seriousness. "When it's official, then." Months passed. The process moved with the typical slowness of bureaucracy, but it moved. The social worker made regular visits, always leaving with positive reports about the environment and the children's development. "They are flourishing," she commented during one of the visits. "The difference is remarkable since the first time I saw them." It was true. Julia, once so serious and suspicious, now smiled easily and talked about school friends with enthusiasm. Kai, once almost mute, now chattered endlessly, sharing fantastic stories about his plush giraffe. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the day arrived. Rachel's phone call came on a sunny Wednesday. "We have a date for the final hearing, 2 weeks from today. All reports are favorable and the judge has already indicated he sees no impediments to the adoption." Ethan had to sit down, his legs suddenly weak. "It's really going to happen," he whispered. "Yes, Mr. Miller, it's really going to happen." That night, he told the children during dinner. He explained in a simple way that in 2 weeks they would go to a special place where a judge would make official what they already knew in their hearts, that they were a family. "And after that, no one can ever separate us again?" Julia asked, her serious eyes fixed on his. "Never again," Ethan promised. "You will be my children, legally and in every sense." "And will have your last name?" she continued. "If you want to." Julia and Kai exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations only siblings understand. "We want to," Julia decided, speaking for both of them as always. "But can we keep Mommy's too?" "Of course," Ethan replied, emotional. "You can be Julia and Kai Smith Miller. That way you'll always carry a part of her with you." On the eve of the hearing, after putting the children to bed, Ethan stood alone on the balcony contemplating the illuminated city below. So many lives, so many stories, and somehow his had intertwined with those of 2 children who needed exactly what he could offer. "I don't have all the answers," he murmured into the night, "but I've never been so certain of something." The day of the hearing dawned clear and bright. Ethan helped the children get dressed, adjusting Kai's bow tie and pinning Julia's hair with the flower clip she had chosen especially for the occasion. At the courthouse, they found Rachel waiting. She smiled when she saw them, so clearly a family. The hearing itself was surprisingly brief. The judge asked Ethan a few questions and spoke kindly with the children. Then, with a smile, he signed the official documents. "Congratulations, Miller family," he declared, handing the papers to Ethan. "May this be just the first of many joys you will share together." In the car on the way home, a comfortable silence filled the space. Ethan drove, occasionally looking in the rearview mirror at the children in the back seat. Julia watched the city through the window, a serene expression on her face. Kai played distractedly with his plush giraffe. As they entered the apartment, Ethan was surprised. There were colorful balloons throughout the living room, a banner that read, "Congratulations, Miller family," and a small table with a cake. "Mariana helped us," Julia explained, referring to Ethan's assistant. "We wanted to make a surprise." "It's perfect," Ethan replied, genuinely touched. It was then that it happened. Julia and Kai approached and hugged him tightly, their small arms completely encircling him, and for the first time, he heard the words he had secretly longed for. "Thank you, Daddy, we love you." Something inside Ethan crumbled. Walls built over years of solitude and self-protection. Tears he hadn't shed since childhood now flowed freely down his face. He hugged the children, his children, pressing them against his chest like the precious treasure they were. "I love you both very much too, my children," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. They remained like that for a long moment, united in that embrace that sealed a promise greater than any legal document could represent. And in that moment, he understood that to love is to surrender, completely, without reservations, without guarantees. It is to let go of control, predictability, the emotional security he had valued so much. And it was worth it. Every second of uncertainty, every night of doubt, every obstacle overcome, everything had led to this moment of fullness he never imagined possible. One Sunday morning, months later, the sun streamed through the apartment windows, illuminating a scene that had become familiar. Pancakes for breakfast, toys scattered on the rug, the sweet scent of cinnamon and vanilla filling the kitchen. The house was alive, not just occupied, but truly alive, full of sounds, colors, movement. On the living room shelf, among books and small treasures collected in recent months, Helena's photo was framed. Not the old one from college, but the one Julia cherished so much. Helena smiling, with her small children in her arms. Julia paused before the photo that morning, contemplating it with her green eyes so similar to her mother's. "Mommy would like to see us like this," she said simply. Ethan approached, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "She really would." "We're happy," Julia continued. "I know she would want this." "She brought you to me," Ethan replied with a smile. "Somehow, somewhere, she made it happen." Julia nodded, accepting that explanation that transcended logic, but made perfect sense in her heart. In the kitchen, Kai had built an impressive tower with colorful blocks. He celebrated when the two entered, raising his arms in triumph. "Look, Daddy, it's taller than me." "Amazing, champ," Ethan exclaimed, genuinely impressed. As Kai explained his building technique, Ethan felt that wave of gratitude that now visited him regularly. Gratitude for the unexpected path his life had taken, for the children who were now his sons and daughter, for the woman who, even without knowing, had given him the greatest gift he could imagine. And finally he felt something he had been trying to articulate for months. It hadn't been he who chose this path. He had been chosen. Chosen by fate, by coincidence, by chance, or perhaps by something deeper and more mysterious.